Hello, everybody. Today we are here with a man that I'm going to call Decentralized Medicine Speaks. He is coming here to me out of El Salvador. And as you know, this is another episode of the Immersive Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler. So, welcome today. I'm coming to you from London, England. It's another, step on the tour around Europe. Sir, how are you doing today? I'm sorry, Mr. Doctor. Can you hear me?
I'm doing well. Beautiful day here in
Okay,
El Salvador, in the sun, in my
very good.
office.
Yeah. Looks like a beautiful office. It's a little different than London, but they both have their ups and downs. And yeah, I just want to take a moment, of course, to always shout out our affiliate sponsors, Gaia TV. We
Yeah, I
appreciate you.
can
We
now. It
love
looks
you.
like you froze on your end.
Really? Oh my goodness. Yeah, I am seeing a thing. You're right. Sorry about that, sir. I'm not sure what happened there, but it's all right. We're on a take
Bug
two,
me
so I'm just
on.
gonna. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, now I can.
Okay.
Probably
Yeah. That
MI6 trying to shut things down.
Yeah, I know that's funny that you say that because it's happened a couple of times on this. I'm probably in the 34th or so episode of the show, and not a whole lot of problems, but it's kind of synchronous why and who and when it happens when there's any kind of connectivity issue. So I'm using a special like a hotspot that's dedicated for this kind of thing. I'm not just relying on the hotel internet. But anyway, I am just going to go ahead and start over again real quick. Another episode, all that. So take two. I really appreciate you, and I'm so sorry about that. We should be just fine. Um, Another episode of the Immersive Podcast, folks, and we are here with Decentralized Medicine Speaks, and he's a neurosurgeon. He's speaking to me from El Salvador, and he's got a lot of things to say. And shout out to the Danny Jones podcast. He was on there last week, and that interview really struck me, and actually my producer Jane as well. And we had a lot of questions and just a lot of interest out of that interview. So a shout out there, but a bigger shout out to this gentleman and everybody like him who is, a whistleblower of any kind and any sort to put this massive puzzle together. How are you doing today, sir?
Hanging loose, enjoying the sun here in my office.
Excellent. I love it. I love the attitude, simplicity, and I love the office. So, El Salvador, wonderful place. It's something it interests me. It's a place I'd love to visit. A lot of people know that watch this show. I'm a cryptocurrency guy. It's something that I've kind of been involved in. Not really something that I would advise people get involved in now. It's just something I got involved in really early. So naturally, it was something that was a positive thing at that time. You have a relationship with President Bukele down there in El Salvador. Is that correct?
Yes, I wrote a
Yes.
constitutional amendment for him about 18 months ago. And I spent a little time in his basement after I gave a presentation to his administration on a beach down here called Playa Mizada. And in that talk, I said, these are 20 things that El Salvador needs to consider, you know, to improve the situation further after Bitcoin. And just so everybody's clear, I'm not a crypto guy. I'm a Bitcoin guy. That's it. I don't believe in any other currency but Bitcoin, and President Bukele is of the same ilk as I am. Because if he
Right.
wasn't, I probably wouldn't have given this speech to begin with. And in that talk, I was extremely provocative. And I didn't hold my tongue with him, just like I didn't hold my tongue with Danny. And apparently, he must have enjoyed what he heard, because his brother, who was in attendance, said, "Look, we would like you to meet with the president in the next 24 to 48 hours, but you're going to have to tell him this story that you just told a lot of people at this event." And this event was done under Chatham rules. I was not allowed to really talk about it. It turned out that the guys who ran the Palestra event wound up filming this.
Oh wow.
So there is some video recording somewhere along the path, of the event. And when I was called by the administration, I went down to the basement of President Bukele's house. He didn't even meet with me at Casa Presidential, which is the White House here.
Right.
We went downstairs. I got to meet his dogs, and we talked, we chatted. And then he said, I understand that you have a very interesting story that is behind the 20 big things that we need to do at El Salvador. He goes, I'd like to hear a little bit of the story. And in that story, I told him the story about Benjamin Rush, about Thomas Jefferson, about James Madison, and where it went. And that Benjamin Rush basically wanted to put a constitutional amendment in the beginning for medical tyranny, so that the government can use that as an angle of attack. For those who are in Bitcoiners will know that we talk about 51% attacks to the Bitcoin network. That's commonplace. I don't have to discuss that. But I explained to President Bukele, I said that medical tyranny could be used as an angle of attack, to any constitution who doesn't have it. And the reason that Thomas Jefferson and James Madison didn't put it in is because they went back in 5,000 years of recorded human history and never found any attack vector that used that, as a source of problem. And that's the reason it didn't get put in. So you fast forward to the constitutional amendment and how I wrote it, and then you think about what I just dropped on the Danny Jones podcast. Here, I told people that my mentor originally was Robert O. Becker when I began to realize how much I was lied to. Robert O. Becker brought to the attention of the industrial military complex in the 1950s through early 73 that when we were retooling our economy, utilizing big tech, information processing, and things like that, that there was biologic effects. And fast forward through that story, he went on 60 Minutes, 1977, told the world it didn't land. The reason it didn't land, in 1977, no one owned a microwave oven, a cell phone, and there wasn't a lot of screen technology out at that time.
Right.
And this story that he recommended, you guys can go back even on microfiche in any place you're at and find on the front page of the
MI6
Boston
is really
Globe,
here, huh?
this story is present. And I'm not sure that I actually mentioned that in the last podcast, but it was present, and you can find it. The interesting part of the story also I didn't mention is that in the Moscow embassy event in 1973, when members of the Trilateral Commission were involved in a pretty nasty situation where the Russian government started to bombard our embassy with microwaves, we had several U.S. delegates, specifically diplomats, come down with blood cancers. And the American military found out what actually the Russian government was doing. They were actually trying to prove a point to the Americans that there was a problem. And this wasn't the first warning they gave them. They gave them another warning at Sandoz nuclear labs in 1957 when Khrushchev sent people to talk to the military about this problem. Said, look, you might want to be careful about what you're doing. And this happened right before the Russians went up, to Sputnik. And Sputnik is actually probably what stimulated Eisenhower to put what General Groves had created on the outside, in the inside of the government, in DARPA. And the government was very, very well aware that there was problems with the use of non-native EMF to communicate. They weren't aware of just how significant the problem was. And then when Becker's work comes out about limb regeneration, they began to realize how the story of what the Russians were developing and what Becker was finding actually did link together. And eventually this was weaponized. And I told you guys how it was weaponized. It was weaponized because something else that the government was involved with from 1951 through 1957, which was the polio vaccine and Salk. When something mistakenly happened by growing, Salk's vaccine on kidney cells from African green monkeys, and SV40 was then passed through the blood system through 300 million people in the world, and we create, a cancer narrative. And, prior to us starting this podcast, you had mentioned that you've had several family members die early from cancer, and that's part of the reason why this story resonated a little bit, for you. So what happens after these things all are occurring at the same time? I kept talking, just so you know, the whole time, so you probably may have all of this information.
I likely do. I was going to actually say that to you because a lot of times it's Riverside, it's 2 VPNs, it keeps uploading. So if you were talking still, that's gold.
Yes. So you're going to be good. So where I'm linking in the story right now, I just tied in your family's cancer history and what was going on, on the backside of this story that was laid out with Danny. And when you see all these programs begin to come together, you start to have to ask the more provocative questions. Like, when you know that this begins to explain a lot of the things that we're seeing, like, it's very, very unusual to show that you have SV40 and COVID jabs, 50 to 60 years after the first part of the story. So that kind of tells you, there's some nefarious things going on, but it begs the question that Danny didn't want to go to, is what happened before General Groves? Like, what was the real big part of the story that actually makes sense of some of this? Because there are some loose ends, and I wasn't able to give you those loose ends in that podcast. So let's talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it's great that we're actually able to, and I say that with an asterisk, that we're actually able to speak about this kind of thing a little bit now, as far as, the jabs and everything like that go. Cause there was a time where we just had to, it was very brazen to speak on it at all. And you just knew it was going to get shut down. It was not going to be okay.
You might have a problem with that. You may have a problem with that now, because I told you before we started, going on with this, that this morning they didn't ban Danny, they banned me from YouTube, which is the reason why in the beginning of this video we didn't use my name. So for people who will listen to this, you're probably wondering, hey, was Tyler being an asshole by not saying his name? No, I actually told Tyler not to do it. And
thank you.
The interesting part of this is that this information has to get out, but you have to understand why the platform that this will go out on is a problem. And it goes back to the original part of the story. So I briefly mentioned in the last podcast we talked about that this started with Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria,
okay,
for those of you who don't know, is the leader of UK government, and the Bank of England basically owns all of her alloidial title. In other words, they run the show. That's a group of families led by the Rothschild family. And what Queen Victoria, very much like this started out with Alton Oshner and Jonas Salk, with good intentions, she wanted to marry her family in to all the other royal families in Europe to prevent the war. Okay, she knew that with all the different factions in all the different countries, that this would be a problem long term. So, as any good woman would do, she came up with a plan to try to solve that problem. And it turned out that her good intentions went awry. And when they went awry, it started to really fester in World War One. But you also have to realize there was another problem that even predates this issue, because that's the European issue that we'll get into.
Right.
What's the issue for us in America that Americans don't understand? It turns out that Queen Victoria, her family is from this place in Germany that I told you about, Saxe, Coburg, Gotha. And that is really her family. She's the first one in the royal chain that went from the Hanover house to this new house in Germany. So she had big ties to that area. And what was the big spur for about 75 years that really pissed the royal family off? That they did not like that a bunch of farmers in the 13 colonies put their pitchforks down, shot their guns at the best army in the world and won. And every single monarch since King George to Queen Victoria had a plan to do something to recapture the alloidial title that they lost in America. So Queen Victoria didn't start out to go after the colonists, but there's a group of loyalists.
Right.
And it turns out this group of loyalists is linked to the real nefarious guys in this story. Those are the guys that were tied to the Bank of England.
And that would
the group
be the Rothschilds and such?
Well, it's not the Rothschilds.
Okay.
Let me explain to you how this went down.
Yeah, of course.
There's a group of merchants in Saxe, Coburg, Gotha who were being persecuted for their religion. And this was called the Order of Benign Birth.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know who that is, that's the oldest name that would eventually become the Anti-Defamation League. And then that modern version, in other words, we're talking Benign Birth 3.0 is the APAC in the United States.
Okay.
And for those of you who don't know who APAC is basically the political army that's linked to the Bank of England and the bankers of the royal family and the papacy. Okay. These are the people where a alloidial title begins. Okay. And what happens now with these two stories? These two stories merge. The first thing is these guys from Saxe, Bertha Coburn come over in the 1850s and they get involved in the same things that they were doing in Germany. They do in the United States. They're really good businessmen. Very similar to what I told you about Meyer Lansky.
Right.
Okay.
Good at something,
really,
of course.
Really, really good businessmen. And they start a lot of different things go on. But no one in the United States government knows that these people are loyal to Queen Victoria. So what do they try to do? They try to foment a civil war between the North and the South. And this group of gentlemen, very powerful, very influential, begin to intercalate themselves into the government of the United States, specifically on the Union side. And they use the ideas that are present in the United States. The big one was the inequity between the powerfulness and the richness of the North versus those people in the South, and the fact that the South was based, their richness was based on human capital of
a labor economy, a slavery economy, etc. Yeah.
So they foment the Civil War with the hopes that the Civil War would destroy the United States so that the crown can take back what they lost in 1774.
Wow.
So what happens? It gets so bad that the guys from the Order of Benign Birth who come from Saxe, Coburg, and Gotha actually assassinate, are part of the program that assassinates Abraham Lincoln.
Wow. Okay.
So most people know what happens next if you're American. The American Civil War truly, to this very day, hasn't been solved. This has fomented, white against black, literally all the way up until modern times. Black people and white people don't understand truly who was behind this, but it was the royal family and the Bank of England that was fueling this, because the Bank of England did not realize that these guys that left Germany to came to the United States would actually be able to have this much power. Because remember what the mindset is, and I try to use this in the last podcast, and hopefully you understand it. The redcoats are like the Italian mafia. They go in and they kill you. It turns out these guys from Saxe Coburg Gotha, they are the accountants, and they try to kill you with building the financing and the banking system and use it against you to create a PR story that people will buy. And remember, there's no social media at this time. So what do? They get involved in newspapers.
Everything.
They get involved in railroads.
Yeah.
You got it. Because what are they doing? This is like social media of their day, and their goal is not to see the United States do well. Their goal is to destroy the United States so they can turn it back to the Queen, and then they're hoping that the Queen will then change their life in Europe for the better, because they were really taken advantage of by the Kaisers, who are the cousins of Queen Victoria.
Oh.
So they're looking to get back in the good graces of the royal family. That's how this starts. So now let's go to 1800, 1901.
Yeah, so we're getting to the turn of the century.
Right. Queen Victoria dies in 1901.
Okay.
And who takes over? Her throne is King George. King George has a cousin in Germany named Kaiser Wilhelm. He has another cousin in Russia running the Romanov family, which is Nicholas the Tsar.
Right.
Turns out there is another big problem that Queen Victoria actually did. She actually spread hemophilia throughout all the royal families. And this comes up because it turns out the Tsar's family and the Romanovs actually have that. In fact,
so it's
Nicholas'
provable.
son actually has hemophilia, and it's a huge problem. So the cousins begin to argue about family business. And you have to realize this is when still the Ottoman Empire is there. They've got all their families are totally intercalated together.
Right.
And this is a family squabble that gets really, really bad and blows up in 1914. But after the Civil War fails, what does the Bank of England do with J.P. Morgan? Remember, J.P. Morgan and his family are originally from England, and they're very tight, and they are part of the consortium that runs the Bank of England.
And Carnegie was also very influential at the time, and he was from Scotland.
He's from
the UK.
He's from Ireland,
right.
Scotland. So in other words, I want you to see how incestuous this relationship is. These are all people that are tied to the crown.
Yeah.
Don't forget this.
It was actually something that was big for me. I always thought Andrew Carnegie. I mean, years ago, I remember reading the books and the biographies on Andrew Carnegie and thinking he was a really great guy because he was known for so much charitable so many charitable acts. That was the way it was pitched to me, growing up in school and everything like that. But then upon looking into things a little further,
you just foreshadowed a big part of this story. Why? Because philanthropy is the PR arm of the people that are tied to this. In fact, you just explained Bill Gates.
100%.
Okay, you just explained a lot of different people that are going to come in the evolution of this story. So what happens right at this time? This is when J.P. Morgan and the Rockefellers get the brilliant idea. Can we do the same thing to the United States? Because remember, they didn't do what they intended to do with Lincoln and the North and the South. They said, can we get control of the United States monetary system? And it turns out
creation of
all the banking that went between 1890 and 1911, they were successful. The big one was the bank failures in 1905. Now, Bitcoiners are going to know all about this
Yeah.
because guess what? Bitcoiners know the story about how money went bad. Most people will, at this point in the story, will point you to the creature of Jekyll Island. I'm okay if you want to do that, but I'm going to cut to the chase and distill down the story. The story is that the Rothschilds and JP Morgan get together. JP Morgan uses a lot of the money from the Bank of England. They form the Federal Reserve. This is formed by the families that actually control all the allodial title of all the royal families. But here's the key one, the popes and the Vatican. They're big time involved in this, okay?
Thanks for going there.
And they agree to actually take over the monetary supply of the United States, and the stupid presidents at that time had no idea that what was still going on from the Civil War was the same game, that they're trying to destroy the colonies so they can get their allodial title back. So the Federal Reserve comes in, and what immediately happens, you've got 3 years after the formation, you get the income tax, which they tell you is just going to be for the top 1%.
Just for a few people.
That's a way to make everybody poor. That's exactly what it was about. And then the Federal Reserve gets its charter from the presidents at that time. And then all of a sudden, World War I breaks out in 1914.
Which is convenient, isn't it? Yeah. Convenient way to move money around.
Well, not only move money around, but what is it really about? It's about solving the squabbles that have been going on for 50 or 60 years in all the royal families.
Right.
And Kaiser Wilhelm gets so pissed that it's not going to happen. And the people in Russia are also pissed. That's the Romanovs.
Of course.
They go to war. The war becomes elevated because this is a family squabble. Why does Kaiser Wilhelm go to the point of getting a guy like Faber and say, I want you to make nitrogen mustard gas to kill my family members on the battlefield? This is how brutal they were to each other.
Yeah.
And remember, from the Faber reaction, what do you get? Because I don't want people to forget this.
It's a great point.
The Faber reaction gives us all of the artificial fertilizers that will be used against us in about 60 or 70 years. Just so you know that. That's what they use in the Monsanto story. That will come later, because what you find out about these people, when they create something, the first intention is clearly there. But when they realize that maybe I went too far, then they say, okay, what can I use to fix this? So the craziest part of what happens in World War I that you need to know for the story that I laid out, World War I created a huge immigration from the Europe to the United States. Who's one of the key players that you need to know about in this time? This is when Meyer Lansky, who's born in Ukraine, he's a Russian Jew.
The Jewish mob guy. Yeah.
Right. It's not really popular.
Tampa, Florida. I mean, I've heard a little bit about the guy.
So you know a little of the story, but that's when he migrates to the United States. I'm just putting that out there in the story because we're not going to get into him yet.
Of course.
But I want you to know why he's going. It's World War I and anti-Semitism in Russia that leads to that.
Of course.
Then something even crazier happens. You've got a revolution against the Romanovs that actually isn't what you've been told. You have three different guys. You have Trotsky, Lenin, and Stalin. And there's something happens for the Romanovs called the Bolshevik Revolution.
The Bolshevik Revolution, of course.
What was the Bolshevik Revolution really all about? This is very simple. And this is really germane to some of the things that are happening right now, and why people online need to realize this is not a story of religion. This is actually a story of allodial title and money. Lord Rothschild talks to his king and tells the king, I think that we need to do something to put Nicholas in his place. So what do? They send an envoy to Russia, and what they do is they remove the Romanovs from power. Who's I should say, this is my mistake. It wasn't the king. It was actually Kaiser Wilhelm sends an envoy from Germany And basically what they do is they talk to these communists that are there. The Bolshevik Revolution basically is run by Trotsky and Lenin and Stalin. You need to know something about Trotsky. Trotsky is a very wealthy Jewish guy from the Ukraine.
Right. Okay.
Lenin is also a communist guy, and Stalin is probably the most, I think, I'd say iron-fisted of the three.
Okay.
But what you need to know about Trotsky, he's an academician. He's a very smart guy.
So they kind of
And
had
Trotsky
had
is
a little
probably the key.
nightmare team put together there, I suppose. If you want a dream team,
I wouldn't
whatever.
say it's a nightmare team. I'm going to tell you what happens. The Kaiser basically wants to teach King George and the Romanovs a lesson. So he tells these Bolshevik guys who had already killed 60 million Christians. Okay,
Right.
Obviously they want to hide that from history, because this is a really bad look when people begin to realize that this family squabble led to this many people getting killed.
A lot of collateral
So what
damage.
do? They tell the triumvirate of the communists that while the war was going on, we want you to do something to the king. So what do? They lock him up in Siberia, and Stalin and Lenin are okay with that. But guess who wasn't? Trotsky. What does Trotsky do?
Right.
He goes the step that Farber did in Germany. He actually kills the entire Romanov family. And this was not something that anybody planned for. Okay? In fact, this was a shocking event, because guess what it said? It told the Kaiser in Germany, and it told King George that this is a really, really serious step. When you go and take out a whole royal family, not only do you fuck with a loyal title, but what did this act that Trotsky really did?
I mean,
it caused the loss of Russia to the communists. Guess what? This was a bigger mistake than what happened in America.
That is actually, that's a huge story that does not go down the pike in American education in any way, shape, or form.
What did I say to Danny? I said, Danny, Britain won 2 world wars, but they really lost both times. Now, are you beginning to understand why I said this? See, Danny never asked me to follow up on that. And this is the follow-up.
Yeah, that's crazy.
You need to know this. So what happens when this turn of events happen? So the Bolshevik Revolution is in 1917. America gets involved in the war at the end. Why? Because it's out of control.
Right.
And all of a sudden, our president steps in and goes, we're going to do something completely different. The war ends in 1918, but what happens? Literally, the royal family of the United Kingdom and the United States come up with a plan in the Treaty of Versailles to punish Germany for putting to death the Romanovs. That's what the Treaty of Versailles was all about. Right. But guess what? In the details of the Treaty of Versailles, what do you need to know? This is when Bitcoiners are really going to get the part of the story. They use Keynesian economic leaders who were tied to Trotsky, to do the terms of this so that they guarantee they have another war down the pike where they can do what? Try to get what they lost back from both America and Russia.
Yeah, it's always a long-term plan. So it's like there's always
why wouldn't it be a long-term play, Tyler?
A 1 year
fucking power for 1,000 years.
Yeah,
all the way back to the fucking Magna Carta.
Of course.
But you know what the problem is? What you don't realize is, what does the Rothschilds come up with? What's the idea? The idea is, let's use religion as our PR for it. Remember I told you the part of the story you forgot?
When we were speaking earlier, of course.
How'd the Pope get involved in this? Well, Pope Pius the 11th,
Right.
The 11th now, not the 12th, actually is also banked by the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds sit down, talk to the Pope, and they come up with an idea to actually bankrupt Germany, force them to hyperinflation, make things so bad
that they have
so
to
they
go to
can
war.
prop up a new regime. No, so they can prop up a new regime in Germany, that they'll control financially, that will create a narrative that will hide what they did in World War I when 60 million people died for a family squabble. And that is where Adolf Hitler comes from.
Right.
And guess what? Pope Pius XI, how did we find all this out, Tyler? Recently. For about
always
50,
way after the
60
fact.
years. No, it's by design, but you have to realize that information was dumped in 2020 when the papal archives came out.
Okay.
And we found out that Pope Pius XI was involved in this, and he signed a specific doctrine that was tied to this. And guess who it was? It was the Pope, the royal family, and the bankers that came up with this idea. They set the trap in the Treaty of Versailles, and guess what happens next? Who's the next king that comes and takes over? That's Edward VIII. And Edward VIII, what do you know about him? Well, he was a king for a really short period of time.
Yeah, not much.
Absolutely was a huge admirer of Hitler. In fact, he goes to visit Hitler from 1929 all the way to 1937 before he abdicates.
Oh, wow.
And nobody wants to talk about this in the UK at all. But guess what? Every single part of it is discoverable. So what does the royal family do? Just like they did with Princess Di, they come up with a story that he falls in love with a divorced American and he has to abdicate the throne because of her. No, he actually had to abdicate the fucking throne because he allowed the plan to come to the surface with Hitler. Yeah. That was the real problem, bro. Wow. Let me finish. Just let me finish.
Wow.
Let me finish.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
No more interruptions, because it blocks the flow when I'm going by my memory.
Absolutely.
So what happened? Now, in 1933, this charter from the Vatican is signed. We find out about it in 2020, and it puts the target now on the Pope. And people start to go, so these guys are in this. So what happens? How do we find out that there is this link? It turns out there's a loyalist that's an SS prince who's married to the king's daughter in Italy. Remember who was Hitler's partner? Mussolini. He turns out to be the envoy that goes back and forth between Hitler, so that there's no problems. But he's a loyalist to all the royal families. Information is passed, and what didn't the royal family intend on? It turns out when Hitler gets into power, he gets fucking drunk on his own stuff. And he's like, no, fuck you. I'm not going to play along with this until you give me something I really want. So what happens? The prime minister, who was only a prime minister for 3 years in the UK at this time, also considered a useful idiot. That's Neville Chamberlain. The king dispatches him to Germany to talk to Hitler. And what was the talk really about? Remember when I said to Danny that Israel got paid off from the Apollo affair? What was the payoff for Hitler to continue to play along with this royal family game? It's called the Munich Pact. And the Munich Pact was signed in 1939 on September 30th. And what did it do? It gave a part of Czechoslovakia called Sudetenland to Nazi Germany because all the people there spoke in German. And why did Hitler ask for this? Because Hitler knew if he could make the royal family bend the knee on the stage, that if he lost the war, he would have leverage over them so that he could tell the real story, because the PR story was Hitler was going to be created, to create a horrible story about killing a certain group of people, in Germany, to hide the fact that 60 million people, we're talking on the order of 10x people died because of the royal family squabble in World War I. Okay? That's where we are now. So what happens when this whole plan goes to shit? Because it goes to shit. Neville Chamberlain comes back to England, and this is called the Law of Appeasement. Of course, everybody in fucking that's not brain dead in the UK goes, this guy's a fucking asshole. Again, he forms the first Lee Harvey Oswald patsy. What do? They sack him. But guess who they have ready? Who's Kamala Harris in this story? Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill comes in, and why did they pick Winston Churchill to be the new useful idiot? Let me explain to you. In World War I, the biggest military blunder that ever happened to the royal family, guess who was in charge of it? Winston Churchill. And he was a drunk on top of it.
Right.
So they realized that they needed a person that they can control. That's just like Kamala Harris is right now. Okay? And they told Churchill, you are going to be our useful idiot. The only thing we need you to do after, and remember, this is before Hitler invades Poland and before he starts a plan. The king in England already knows what the plan's coming. Everybody's there. That's the reason why Edward didn't stay anywhere else except in Paris at this time, and eventually he goes to London. Who knows about all this stuff? Trotsky. Trotsky goes to London.
Right.
Trotsky is talking to people in London, and when he hears this, he gets furious. That's the reason he decides to fucking kill the Romanovs. He goes fucking nuclear, okay? Absolutely nuclear. And when this shitstorm begins to happen, you start to see the whole plan start falling apart piece by piece. So Hitler goes in and starts World War II. Churchill is told by the royal family, you have to get FDR involved in this war. We need him to join because guess what?
Right.
The executive branch isn't captured yet in the United States. That doesn't come until General Groves starts the process in the 1945.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm
So
following.
FDR in this story is a good guy because remember, he's elected in 33 and he goes all the way to 45 until April of 45.
Long time, yeah.
So who's the leader of Russia now? It's Stalin. Why? Because in 1940, Stalin gets so pissed with Lenin that Trotsky did this on his own that he fucking kills Trotsky in Mexico City. So guess what? Lenin and Stalin rule the Soviet army. So now you have Churchill with Stalin and the United States on the Allied powers. This is exactly what the royal family wants because guess what they want to do?
Right.
They want to reclaim both territories in a world war, and they're using their bankers to actually fund both sides of the war. So the stories that you hear in the United States about the Bush family, why do I bring that up here? Because who does the Rothschilds partner with? The Bush family, who controls a bank called Brown Harriman on Wall Street. Who is the guy that's running that show? That's Preston Bush,
Right.
the grandfather of George H. Bush, who is in the ONI of the United States.
Wow.
That eventually becomes the OSS, which eventually becomes the CIA.
Yep.
So what
Wow.
happens? The bankers are selling bullets to both sides of the war. And who are their partners? All the captains of industry. Carnegie, Henry Ford, J.P. Morgan. Okay? The guys that eventually go on to run Citigroup.
Of course.
All of these guys, all these people that you know, they are funding both the Nazis and the American war. And who's figuring all this out when this is going on? Well, General Groves is, because what does he realize? Who caused the Great Depression? The bankers did to get you to the Second World War.
Right.
So guess what? When they create the monetary need, it turns out Groves figures out that they created the war to get us out of the Depression. So he goes, wait a minute, I need to use this plan as part of my plan. And what does he do? He takes a mini Cosmo and starts to do it outside of the purvey of Eisenhower.
Okay.
And what eventually happens? It turns out fucking Britain loses again. They win, but they lost because they didn't get what they really wanted.
Right.
Okay?
Interesting.
So does the process stop for them? No, the process doesn't stop. Turns out they go back to the drawing board and they realize that the American military was really, really good. And what did I tell you about Trotsky versus Stalin. This is the most important link that I'll probably make in your podcast for the people listening to this.
Yeah.
I mentioned this to Danny, but we didn't get into it. What happens at Yalta and what happens at Potsdam are the biggest thing that explains to you why we are in the situation we are now. At Yalta, you have Stalin, Churchill, and FDR.
Right.
Stalin tells Churchill at FDR, do not trust Churchill. Why? Because Stalin knows what they did to the Romanovs via Trotsky. He actually tells FDR at that meeting that he had Trotsky killed for killing the Romanovs.
Wow. That's a little known fact.
Churchill doesn't know any of this because I told you he was probably drunk. Okay?
Right.
And remember what Churchill's whole goal was. His whole goal was to make sure that he pitted the United States against Russia to start a Cold War so that they could recapture what they lost.
Right.
Well, Churchill and the Brits are not strong enough after the war to do that because, truthfully, Germany destroys Europe and they destroy the UK.
Right.
So the American bankers actually wind up having to bail out the U.S. through the Marshall Plan.
Is it? Yeah. So build back Europe. That really did happen, right? Is that's actually true?
Of course it did. Yeah, and the reason why there was an extra pile of money left after FDR dies, what does Groves do? He goes in and makes sure he puts his Manchurian candidate when he replaces Wallace for Truman, and he tells Truman, when you go meet with Stalin, you go tell Stalin he's not getting his fucking country rebuilt. In other words, what does Groves realize right away? I'm going to use that pile of money that FDR was going to do to rebuild Russia, and I'm going to build the industrial military complex, and I'm going to finish the plan that these guys actually had going on.
Wow.
Dude, that's the real part of this.
That's a big turning point.
How does all this fly into the guy that we mentioned, I don't know, 30 minutes ago, Meyer Lansky?
Mm-hmm.
So let's take it to the United States. Meyer Lansky lands in New York City. He meets a guy named Lucky Luciano, who's part of the Genovese crime family, eventually, down the road. They get to be really good friends, and it turns out the same story that I told you that happened in the macrocosm with the royal family happens with these two cats. They form Murder, Inc.
Yeah.
They link New York, Chicago, and Florida crime families. They become really successful. What does Meyer Lansky do early on from 1911 all the way up to 1933? Well, it turns out they figure out how to use booze. Who's part of this program? Another Russian Jewish family, the Bronfmans. They actually, to this very day, own most of the high-end alcohol brands in the world.
Oh.
So guess what? That family links up with Meyer Lansky. They start running bootleg. Do you remember anything about Prohibition in the United States? They created a black market. The black market, Lansky uses his mathematical abilities to become fucking super wealthy. And he does this not only in New York, he does it in Detroit, he does it in Cleveland. And that's when he hooks up with Mo Dalitz. That's when he hooks up with all the front men who become the accountants of Murder, Inc.
And that's all the Jewish mob guys. Okay.
You got it.
Yeah.
So Luciano winds up having the same problem Capone does. He gets thrown into jail, but he's still the mob boss.
Right.
So what does Meyer Lansky do to help his buddy out? Guess who contacts Meyer Lansky in World War I? The FBI, J. Edgar Hoover.
Okay.
They got reports through the ONI and the OSS that German subs were coming in to New York Harbor and causing issues, here and there. Okay.
So I've heard that
they know that the mob controls the docks in New York.
Luciano
they asked for Lansky's help to keep eyes on the harbor if anything crazy happens. So guess what happens? Lansky actually finds German spies, and what does he do? He turns the information over to the FBI, ONI, and OSS, but he also turns it over to the guys in the Mossad. Why? Because remember, he's a Jewish guy. Right now, there's no Israel. Rothschilds promised the Jews to give them Palestine in 1911 through World War I. Still hasn't happened yet because, remember, there's no Israel yet. So Lansky's feeding both sides the information.
Wow.
And guess what he finds from that thing? Do you remember I mentioned a guy in Danny's podcast called Kurt Plotkin, who's an SS surgeon,
Yeah.
1937?
Okay. Yeah.
Guess who fucking Lansky found? That guy.
Wow.
And Lansky found out about the mind control experiments going on in Germany.
Still going on after the war, or even just during the war?
Oh, dude, this I'm going to tie this bow up for you very, very shortly. So when this information is turned over both to the Americans and the Israelis, they get really worried. That's when the letter Einstein writes to FDR, that's when we get Dulles has to go and get all these scientists. All this stuff is going on all at the same time. You have to remember, it is absolutely chaos.
Wow.
Okay? They kill everybody else. Murder Inc. kills all the spies except Plotkin. Plotkin gets turned over to the CIA, or at that time it's the OSS, and they start picking this guy's brain, and they find out about the mescaline, the peyote, and what Hitler is actually doing. And then Plotkin starts to tell the people in the military that there's a plan to control the people in Europe after the war is over for the benefit of the benefactors of the war. And that's when Lansky goes,
oh my goodness,
wait a minute. And he goes, you're going to tell me that the people in this war are actually, this is payoff for killing the Romanovs in my home country?
Yeah, it's so backwards. So, oh my goodness.
Nobody understands the real story. So what happens in 1939 with the Pope? Because you think I forgot about the Pope. Pope Pius dies. Pope Pius XII comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Pope Pius XII is known as Hitler's Pope. In fact, we just found out in a data dump that there's a special dispensation going between the SS and this Pope the whole time. The story you're going to hear from the papacy right now, because they've been trying to block this, and for those people who think that this story is bullshit, there's a guy named Cromwell,
fact check it,
who actually started to write this story in 2020 after the dump. Just so you know, he's a Roman Catholic guy. He started writing the book to actually exonerate the Pope, and it turned out he wound up putting the Pope in a really bad light. In fact, you find out that Pope Pius the 11th and 12th are probably some of the most nefarious fucks. Why? Because they're on the side of the royal family and the Rothschilds.
Right. Yeah.
And do you want to know why they're involved in this? They're involved in this because they realize they're going to use religion as the proxy after the war. They're going to pit Jews against Muslims against Christians. And what does the Pope want out of all this? They want to just make sure they have control of Jerusalem. That's all they care about.
Yeah, it's so...
And they want to make sure they don't lose any alloidal titles. So what do? They inform. They're the informants for Hitler. What's going on both sides? In other words, how things are going. What didn't they plan on? They didn't plan on Stalin kicking the fucking Nazis' ass in Europe. And this is what we heard in JFK's American University speech in 1960 when he actually thanks Russia and their people for doing what they did.
Right.
Here's the craziest part of the story. So Plotkin, I told you, introduces everybody to MK Ultra. MK Ultra gets turned over to Sidney Gottlieb. Guess who Sidney Gottlieb begins to start communicating with?
Who?
Family members in academia in the United States who are tied to Trotsky.
Okay.
If you think what I just told you is wrong, I want you to do a hard stop. In fact, I'll even let you Google this right now. Look up who is the national, the NIDS. That's the drug lord in the United States that's partners with Fauci. Do you know what her name is? Nora Volkow.
Laura Volkow.
You know who Nora Volkow is? No, Volkow.
Volkow, okay.
Okay? She's in charge of the NIDS. You know what she does? She's a psychiatrist in New York at NYU. You know who she's the granddaughter of? Trotsky.
Really?
Trotsky.
Wow.
And guess what? You know what she did in 2011? She did the first ever study on how non-native EMF raises blood glucose and insulin and put it in the literature.
Wow.
And guess what? When I sat down with Robert O. Becker in 2007, 2008, guess what he told me?
What's that?
His research led him back to this story between Groves and the Navy. And he said, I'm really concerned about this lady they just gave this position to last year. Her name is Nora Volkow, and she's related to Trotsky.
Yeah.
This is in 2006, bro.
Wow.
She's been running the show in 2006. You want to hear how it even gets crazier? Guess how Fauci gets his job in 1982? Meyer Lansky.
Right. Yeah,
So,
people
I gotta
forget
give
that
you
he's been in power in the business for so long. Like, I mean, you know, he was kind of quietly in the cut, making actually what I think to be pretty big decisions for quite some time. But I'm sure you know a little bit more about
he's
that.
the guy that made the architecture of Murder Inc. But now here's the part where the people that are upset about the vaccines, centralized medicine, and Bitcoin are absolutely going to be stunned. This is going to shake you to your core.
Okay.
So when all the shit goes down in Cuba, I mentioned to Danny that, you know, the Italians got turned off, but he never wanted me to go down the Lansky thing, but Lansky walked out of Cuba with $3 million. So the CIA at that time knew that he walked out with $3 million. So what did they do? They turned it over to J. Edgar Hoover and they said, you need to arrest this guy for tax evasion. It took them a long time to do it. So what was the plan of J. Edgar Hoover? To capture Lansky the way they caught Capone, with tax evasion.
Same way, same play.
What do they do? They arrest him. They arrest him, and guess what they find out? They can't find out where the money went. They have no earthly idea. You're talking about the best intelligence agency in the world, both the CIA and FBI, cannot find out about what Lansky did. So this is why Lansky is so important in this story. He is a whiz at mathematics.
Okay. Yep.
The only thing that J. Edgar Hoover finds out, there's a guy named Pinsky in Geneva that Lansky seems to have a relationship with. So I remember this, and I go back and I read one of the volumes in the Warren Commission, and guess what I find out? In the Warren Commission, turns out the CIA has a link to the same bank in Geneva.
Wow.
So guess what I realized right away is that Lansky was working
with an asset,
with somebody in the CIA to launder money. So what happens during the Nixon administration? They pick Lansky up in Florida again, and they arrest him. At this time, one of Lansky's frontmen, you should love this story because he's right in your neighborhood. His name is Ira Malnick. Ira Malnick is a very famous lawyer in Florida that takes care of very high-profile cases.
Yeah.
He happens to be running the front for Lansky since the 1950s.
Wow.
You'll be shocked to know that from 1954 to 1956, he's in the U.S. military.
Oh, wow.
So guess what? He's knowing all the shit that's going on with the mob before JFK era happens.
Ooh.
He knows that Lansky is world famous in governments because he gave Nazi spies to both the Mossad and he actually gave them to the American side. And guess what? He's even more famous than that. He's even involved in the Jonathan Pollard spy case. That Israeli Mossad agent,
a lot of connections
was
there,
spying in America for Israel.
Wow.
That's how deep this is. So what does Malnick tell Lansky in 1969, 1970? He says the Mossad set up a rule that mimics what happened with Lee Harvey Oswald in Russia.
Okay.
The CIA was able to get Oswald back in because they had a special program set up for him. And Malnick knew about this because he worked in the military. He says, so we had the Mossad set up a plan in Israel that any Jew can come back to Israel and ask for a passport and for a cover, like sanctuary. All they have to do is ask for it. And remember, this is in post-war Israel. This is after 67, you know, with the Arabs and all that.
Yeah.
So what does Lansky do? He seeks refuge in Italy, I should say in Israel. What happens in Israel? This is mind-blowing. He not only gets a passport, but then the other side, the non-Mossad side of Israel, says, we're going to send you back to the United States to Florida.
Wow.
And Lansky goes, why are we going to do this?
Why?
He goes, well, these guys really want to come after you because you're a bad guy and everybody knows what you did from the time you stepped foot in there, and they want to do something. He goes, okay. He goes, tell him I got a nugget for him. Tell him I can tell him how to launder fiat money and they'll never get caught. He sits down and negotiates with them, and what happens? You get the Bank Secrecy Act of 1970.
Wow.
If you want to know the reason why the United States sets this law, because Lansky tells them exactly how Murder Inc.
works.
Filtered millions of dollars away from them.
Laundromats.
And they realized, the bankers realized right away that fucking Meyer Lansky is smarter than the Rothschilds. And
it's almost impressive.
Dude, this guy was a machine. And what was Lansky's key? Why couldn't you find anything on him? He never owned any assets. He had guys like Ira Malnick as the frontman. Mm-hmm. He had no assets anywhere. But how did he control things? He owned people.
Yeah.
That's what he did.
Which is...
And guess what? You know where he got the idea? He got the idea from the royal family and the Rothschilds, from those Nazi spies that he turned over. He realized right away that owning people was more important than owning assets.
Yes. I mean, yeah, intelligence is an asset. You know, that's something that we see today with we saw it a few years ago with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, which obviously has ties to, the Mossad. And
not only that, guess where the Mossad got this idea? From Meyer Lansky. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
And,
and the thing is, people don't realize that that's why now you have P. Diddy. P. Diddy is just evolution 2.0 of what Epstein is.
Right.
That's all it is. That's to control
African-American
PR business. Exactly right.
Epstein.
Because guess what the role is? Keep the Jews, the Muslims, the Christians, and the blacks all at each other's neck through the PR story, but never let them understand really who the person is behind the story. So what does the United States government do in 1971? Like, all the Bitcoiners think 1971 was a big deal. No, you're fucking idiots if you believe that.
Gold standard.
This was part of the program to destroy the money. What did Lansky tell them? Lansky showed them a new way to control the money supply. That's where the original idea for the central bank digital coin comes from.
Wow.
When he shares this with the U.S. Treasury, the U.S. Treasury lets him come to the United States. Guess how he got acquitted? 1974, between the Nixon and Ford administrations. Who was Nixon a vice president of? Eisenhower. Who was involved in the JFK assassination? Nixon. Last part, did Ford spend any time on the Warren Commission, my friend?
Yeah.
Oh, he did.
I think so. Yeah.
And you know who else was a Mossad asset? Take a guess. The AG for Ford. The Attorney General for Ford is working with Lansky.
Well, Meyer Lansky is like a much bigger figure in history of America than people are. The world history, really. People know.
Danny didn't want to go there.
People know Santo Trafficante. Everybody knows that name in Tampa. Not everybody knows Meyer Lansky, which I think, and especially given what you just told me, it's like, whoa, wow, why?
Now you know why, because he's the accountant. The front man is always the Italian guys. Okay? Right. And where does this idea come from? Because Meyer Lansky learns what the royal family and the Rothschilds are really doing. So what does he do? He just mimics it in the criminal underworld. He does exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
same thing.
He's actually better than the Rothschilds were. And when the U.S. government actually gets the information of who really the royal family is, magically, you get the Bank Secrecy Act. And then magically, things change in Belgium. Then you get the BIS. Then you get all these financial regulations. Then you get, remember, the Bank Secrecy Act is where the word AML comes from, KYC. Now, why did I tell you in Danny's podcast that Mo Dallas and Lansky used laundromats, and that's where it originally came from? Now you know where the Bank Secrecy Act comes from. Same fucking story.
Wow. That's incredible. Wow. It's funny. You were mentioning, the Bitcoiners would know this, and a lot of the Bitcoiners I know say things, it kind of jokingly, but they say things like, if Thomas Jefferson and the founding fathers had blockchain tech, then they might have had like a better chance at their ideals.
No, there's no question. I don't think Bitcoiners are wrong about that. But you know what the problem is? Bitcoiners don't realize, like, there's a guy named Ben who I really don't like because he's too smug. Um, he thinks that everything went to shit in 1971. If you listen to what I said to Danny and what I'm saying to you, bro, this goes all the way back to Queen Victoria. And when you realize who you're playing with, you're playing with a reign that's over 1,000 years long.
Right.
These people will plant things. Like, I can tell you, the Bank Secrecy Act is planted in 1970 because they know they're going to come up with a CBDC in the future. Here we are 50 years later. Guess what? And has King Charles stopped? No. He's still trying to recapture. Why do you think Ukraine exists now? They're going back to go try to get fucking Russia. Dude, that's what this is all about. And they're trying to create, right now, if you want to know what's happening to Trump, everything in the United States is about starting Civil War number 2.
Yeah, it seems I thought that was going to happen earlier this year.
This isn't about the Jew bankers, because that's what they want you to believe that. It's not about the Muslims. It's not about the Christians. It's about these people trying to get one world government to get everything back the way it used to be when they had it in 1774.
Right.
They want to restore all medieval feudalism. They want all of us to be their economic slaves. That is the front that the World Economic Forum is all about.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what the WHO is all about. That's what Nora Vocal is all about. That's what Anthony Fauci is all about. They're all playing their roles in this Shakespearean play.
Hell yeah.
And you guys, as the audience, keep fucking falling for the plots.
Fall for it every time.
And you can't. You can't. You have to understand it's about a loyal title. It's not about the religion. The religion is being used as the PR show to continue to divide us. So that, because the one thing that they do know, this plan, if you get 360 million Americans to understand really what's going on, dude, it's game, set, match. They can't have that. The reason they hate Putin, what did Putin get? 90% of the people. So guess what? Their plan in both of those places is a problem.
Hearts and minds. Yep.
Putin is going to be really hard to beat, and they're doing everything possible to beat him. They're even blowing up gas to Europe. They don't give two fucks about the people in Europe. They already killed 60 million people at the turn of the century. Why the fuck wouldn't they kill 60 million more?
Yeah, what
to get back what they lost?
If anything, now that's a smaller percentage to them. That's the way they would look at it.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And they know that they can recapture anything when they get a CBDC. Why? Because they'll be able to control everything in the world.
Yeah.
And you need to realize that the guys that do all the philanthropy, the Andrew Carnegies of today are the Rockefellers of the 50s. Now they're the Bill Gates and the Warren Buffetts.
Yep.
People forget. Let's talk about Ukraine.
Real wealth.
The biggest breadbasket in the world.
Okay.
Ukraine's the biggest breadbasket in the world. They're worth a fortune to grow food.
Yeah.
BlackRock owns that for the contracts. Do you know who owns BlackRock? Warren Buffett, 49%.
Is Warren Buffett or a trust, or is it Berkshire Hathaway, or actually Warren Buffett?
Berkshire Hathaway.
Okay.
It's Berkshire Hathaway. Guess what? He's a trilateral commission member.
Yeah, of course.
All the way back to Nelson Rockefeller.
And a Bilderberger.
You're back to the story in 1911. You're back to the story in 1911.
Jeez.
What's going on right now with FEMA? FEMA is just another Trotskyian idea built by Mayorkas. Who's Mayorkas? He's a Cuban Jew. Guess where he's from? Ukraine. He goes all the way back to Trotsky, too.
Make things look
they're everywhere.
Philanthropic.
People need to remember, Trotsky and Stalin aren't the same communists. Trotsky is the wealthy Russian Jewish immigrants that populated all of academia in the United States from 1930 all the way to today. That's who Paul Krugman is. That's who he is.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful statement. That's a really big. I mean, that's
the most powerful statement. Why? It's big. About money.
It's all about money.
It's not about religion.
Yeah, no, it's divide and conquer, man.
Care less about religion. Religion is a fucking a Google AdSense to them. That's what it is.
It's crazy.
And when you realize that they've been using screens to dumb everybody down to this story, they don't want any of you to be able to put this together.
Right.
So what did Becker really tell me in 2007?
Yeah, let's
He
get
told
into
me
that.
everything he put together up to that time. And he said, Jack, if you're going to put the rest of this together, he goes, don't do what I did in 1977. He goes, stick to the science, keep teaching people the science. He goes, and then someday in the future of your life, this will be the right time. In his talk, there was no microwave ovens, there was no cell phones. My friend, Tyler, in my world, there's nothing but microwave ovens and cell phones, and everybody's addicted to all of them. So guess what? You know what the difference between me and Becker is?
Yeah, what's that?
Timing is right.
Timing's right.
His timing was
You're
wrong.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm in London, man. I'm staying right in Piccadilly Circus. When I go down the elevator from my hotel, I walk out and I see those 50-foot tall screens and, 50,000 people holding a screen and wearing, Bluetooth buds and all that stuff. And it's even just since
Now you understand the deal.
It's insane. I mean, it's a whole city, and it's more apparent to me in the UK just being here, I must say, because I know that this is one of like the CCTV capitals of the world. So there's screens, there's cameras, and then there's also just a massive, it's screens and cameras. So it's people watching screens, watching us while we're watching screens. And it's kind of quite something, to see.
I mean, you realize once they get everybody dumbed down, like they got the right guy in now. Starmer's the guy they needed. That's the reason why they used the other idiots. The last two, Liz and Sunak, also World Economic Forum people. They were plans for this guy because this is the guy they really wanted. And if you want to know the reason why I know the game is coming up, I pay attention to what happens in England, because what happens in England tells me what's happening in the rest of the world.
100%.
And because this story is about them.
Yeah.
Don't ever think it's not about them. It's about them.
Right.
They are trying to recapture what the Romanovs lost, and they're trying to recapture what King George lost in America.
Yeah.
This is about getting the two superpowers back. And they're going to use money to do it. And that's the reason why you don't want to own a shitcoin. That's the reason you want to own a Lloyd title, because it turns out that Meyer Lansky gave them the CBDC idea and the BIS system. Guess what?
So
somebody, Satoshi.
Meyer Lansky, Satoshi.
No, to be honest with you, it would not surprise me. This is something I will say. I've talked to one of my friends who's a big Bitcoiner about this. We drank a couple of drinks of wine and we're hanging out. He goes, "Who do you really think is Satoshi?" And I told him, I said, it's somebody with a physics background that is probably linked to the mob.
Okay.
And this is the reason why I said it, because I think if I know Lansky like I think I know Lansky, he would always have a solution to the problem that he gave to the Rothschilds. Why? Because I don't think Lansky trusts anybody. The only person I can tell you that I know he trusted really well and he got fucked in that endeavor, I didn't tell you this part of the story. Remember when Lansky gave the German spies up?
Yeah.
One of the things that happened, do you know why he did it?
It was his exit.
Lucky Luciano was in jail. No, Lucky Luciano was in a maximum security jail.
He was worried he was going to sing?
No.
I'm sorry.
The reason why is Luciano was in a maximum security prison. He couldn't run his crime syndicate. And because Lansky was treated well by the families, he went to the CIA and said, you put him in a minimum security prison. And he goes, I'll help you. And guess what they did? They put Luciano in a minimally security prison. Luciano and him, they became best friends after this. And let me tell you how bad this was. The story that I told you guys about Mo Dalitz and Bugsy Siegel, that's Benjamin Siegel. This is probably the saddest part of the story if you're a Meyer Lansky fan. Siegel is the guy who's the front man for the Jewish Mafia in Vegas.
Yeah.
He starts in 1946 putting Dalitz's plan in place, and the casinos start losing money. In other words, it's not going well.
Right.
and the mob families, the five families, sit down, call a meeting, and they want to whack Siegel. Remember, Siegel's been friends with Lansky from before 1920.
Wow.
And he convinces Luciano to give Siegel another chance. He gives Siegel another chance. Siegel actually makes a little bit of money. The families outside of Luciano want to whack him again. Meyer Lansky convinces them not to do it again. Literally a year later, they go back in the red. Luciano can't save him. They whack Siegel in Beverly Hills, California. Yeah. And what happens 2 hours later? 3 frontmen for Lansky walk in. One of the guys is Dalitz. Wow. Dalitz gets the casino. The first thing he does, this will really blow your mind. First thing he does, because he learned from Prohibition how to get people to eat and drink.
Right.
That's where the blue light story comes in. The first thing he does, he starts buffets and gives people tons of food and blue lights them. And then he finds out within his first month, profits went up by 50%. So what did Dalitz really do? Dalitz actually figured out how the leptin-melanocortin pathway works without ever being a scientist. He was an observer of human behavior.
He found it the other way.
When you put it in an alien environment. And then what did Dalitz do? He just saw one of his best friends get whacked by the mob. So if you don't think he was motivated to do something different,
right?
So he takes the clocks out. He paints the walls. He fucking goes all in on the blue light story. This is when the one-armed bandits are everywhere.
Slot machines, yeah.
The Italian guys are laughing at him. And guess what happens?
Profits.
He makes huge amounts of money. And guess what? Then everybody starts to go, in the CIA, we got to find out what this guy's doing.
Wow.
So the 2 guys that Lansky gives to the CIA, Dalitz and this Kurt Plotkin guy, actually lead to MK Ultra. That is how it went down.
Wow.
And guess what? Nora Volkow learns about all of this stuff from all the people in academia that are linked through ARPANET, that becomes DARPA, that becomes the internet. Because guess what? All the Trotskyites that Groves put together are all big tech people.
Yeah.
And they start going through all their programs sequentially so that they do what the industrial military complex wants them to do. And Groves' plan is to finish what the Nazis started.
And I guess they can speed that up a lot now with, the amount of just the sheer raw amount of screens that are in front of people. I mean,
not just screens.
I'm guilty of it.
In technology. You've gone from 0G to 5G. Now you're up to 6G. You don't think this is what's going on. And you have to realize, when you think about, most Americans don't think about communism in the way that I'm describing it to you.
Right.
I'm actually describing to you, the people in Russia are kind of like the story that centralized medicine tries to sell you in cholesterol. There's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, LDL and HDL. It's not like that at all. It's just that Stalin realized what Trotsky did to the Romanovs was a fucking huge problem. And I'm not trying to tell you that Stalin's a good guy, but he tells that story to FDR. And when FDR comes back from Potsdam, General Groves realizes he cannot have Henry Wallace as the vice president. Yesterday, just so you know, before I got booted off YouTube, I posted a link, and hopefully you'll post this link.
Yeah.
Go find Henry Wallace's Common Man speech that he gives in 1942.
Wow.
That is the speech that makes Groves realize that Henry Wallace is a loose cannon, because he's talking like Stalin.
Wow.
And he goes, if this guy is the president after FDR, he's going to do not only everything FDR did, but he's going to be more in line with Stalin. Worse. He goes, and I can't have that. He goes, I need to have Stalin as my bad guy to replace Hitler. Because what I'm going to do, he goes, I'm going to abscond the plan of the Rothschilds and the royal family to the nth degree.
Wow, that's insane. Wow. So you mentioned the 1G all the way to 5G thing, and the big thing during the the lockdowns and everything was they were talking about the implementation of 5G. Is that something you might be able to confirm or deny? That was that something where they
It's
were
true.
implementing 5G during a lockdown type of
Yes.
situation? Yeah.
Well, not only that, to make people more compliant so that you would take the jab. That's exactly what it was about.
And 5G, like the frequency
And
of
what was
5G actually you believe influence that?
yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, guess who did the study, bro? 2011, Nora Volkow. You want to hear how much you're not getting, Tyler? And see, this is my problem. This is where I get frustrated. Guys like you and Danny, you don't know the fucking science like I do. What does happens in 2017? The NTP study done by the federal government comes out, and it shows that nocturnal mammals that are in 3G get fucking tumors everywhere.
Wow.
Does that fit into this story, bro? Yeah, it does.
Big time.
What does the federal government do when this comes out? They go redo the study because we can't have this out.
Fix it. Yeah.
Because guess what? It's the fucking SV40 story with non-native EMF all over again. So what does the government do when 2017 NTP study comes out? They say, okay, let's use this like we did with the first SV4 story. Let's use this against them. Let's put fucking SV40 in the COVID jabs.
So just like you had mentioned in other interviews, and I definitely will put a link for the video you mentioned prior, by the way, in the bio to this one. You had mentioned the polio vaccines and such that had come out earlier in the century. Same story with the COVID jabs and all that. It's like nothing new.
No, it isn't new. And the problem is that it's new to you guys because
right.
you don't know your history well enough. Like, it's crazy to me that a doctor has to give people the history lesson. But here's the good thing. I'm so pissed off because my profession was stolen. When I found out how my profession was stolen, dude, this has made me the saltiest fucking doctor you can ever imagine. Because I realize that it's tied to a loyal title and money.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, when people understand this story, this we can take this back, but we all have to be rowing in the same direction.
100%.
Like, I can't have Jews going after Muslims, Muslims going after blacks, Christians going after all of them, them saying, well, this is what the Bible says. Fuck the Bible.
Right.
This is not about the Bible.
Not about
this
that.
is about a loyal title. And if you want to know, I try to tell people this. I can hate my government and not hate my country.
Right.
Just like I can love God and fucking hate the church. Because that's what I do. I don't like the church.
It's the same.
They are
same
complicit
principle.
In this plan. Okay?
Yeah. And the Bank of the Vatican's got to be involved, right? I mean, they're the only bank on earth where they're not allowed. They don't have to disclose anything. Is that correct? Nothing at all.
That's what a loyal title is, bro.
Yeah.
That's the whole definition of a loyal title.
And what about? I mean, something that's a little more fringe, but something I've heard is like there actually is more than one pope. The Orsini families, the gray pope, the black pope, the white pope. Is that something that got any merit to it, or is that?
To be honest with you, it wouldn't surprise me in the least. I can't tell you that I have
for sure. Yeah.
Any good data, or that I would speculate, because what I've told you up to this point, I believe is the truth.
All
based
truth.
on my research for the last 30 years.
Okay.
Do I believe that there's a big problem deep in the Catholic Church between the Jesuits? And for those of you, I know you don't know me. Where did I go to college? I went to a Jesuit college. So this all got disclosed to me after I finished. But I will tell you, when I went through my Jesuit education, don't think that I wasn't a problem child when I was growing up for the Catholic Church, because I was. I didn't believe anything that they told me, because growing up in New York City, I'll never forget in third grade when I saw the T-Rex. Then literally I went to religious class on Wednesday afternoon, going to public school in New York City, and it done telling me that it's only 6,000 years old. I looked at her and I said, look, I was probably like 8 years old at the time. I said, are you fucking kidding me?
Doesn't make any sense.
And they called my mother in. They actually called my mother in. They said, your son is a problem.
He's spreading misinformation.
I wasn't controllable then, because I'm like, look, if you're going to lie to me, you got to have a good lie.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of that kind of kid. I told Danny this. I'm telling you the same thing. I from the time I came out of the vagina, I'm extremely curious.
Yeah.
And when somebody tells me bullshit, I am going to go right after the bullshit. I do it with food gurus. I do it with nuns. I do it with Nazis. I do it with the royal family. I do it with scientists. I do it with centralized people. I don't care who you
An
are.
equal
I have an
opportunity skeptic. Yeah.
right. No, I have an irreverence for title. The more titled you are, the more I think you're a Trotsky person.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
Of course. I would agree
And
with
that's
that.
what
Yeah.
academia. My problem with academia is I realized that medicine was stolen by these berserko people that run 23andMe and YouTube and Google and big tech.
Right.
I have a problem with these people
Yeah.
because I think they're a problem.
And it really does go so much deeper. Like I mean, it's just so much deeper than people realize. Like you said, I mean, just I bet even that we're talking about right now, we talk about blue lights and how that's meant to, people don't realize that the MK Ultra, experiments and that there's actually those patents held for blue light for mind control and such. I mean, people really, even hearing us say that now, probably don't believe like, oh yeah, that's like an actual fact. Like it may take steps
No, it's not an opinion anymore.
Right.
In fact, you need to realize the granddaughter of Trotsky, who is a psychiatrist, just so you know, also linked to Jolly West. Just so you know that. Jolly West that Danny talked about, who dealt with Jack Ruby in the jail.
Wow.
Also, Nicole Kidman's father, who's a psychologist in Australia, also linked to this academic circle. Dude, you have no idea. These people are at the top of the industrial military complex and control everything that's studied.
Yeah.
But all you got to do after this podcast is go look up Nora Volkow's name. I mean, look, my members are going to listen to this. My detractors are going to listen to this.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to go, now I know why Jack's been talking about blue light for 20 years. And then when you see how many times I have actually given Nora credit for her first study in 2011 that she did at NYU that showed non-native EMF raises blood sugar and insulin. Why? Because she's basically telling you the food guys are fucking idiots.
Right.
Okay?
Of course.
But she's also uncovering what's really going on.
Yeah.
And I want you to know there's a reason why she's studying all this. There's a reason there's tons of videos out there with her and Anthony Fauci starting in 2020 talking about this. She's involved in the plan to keep you out of the sun, keep you in front of a computer,
right,
keep you with an LCD screen. Because guess what? When you're stupid, fat, and you can't think, you are the target of people that are built like a Trotsky mindset. You are the target of Google. You are the target of 23andMe. You are the target of every big tech company out there because you're addicted to their technology through your dopamine reward tracks.
Yeah.
They have figured out how to steal the leptin melanocortin pathway and weaponize it against you to get back Russia and the United States under the royal family's control and the bankers that live in Belgium.
All under one.
That's distillation
big
of this coffee martini.
That is insane, doctor. Wow. Yeah, and I don't think people understand the implications of that. That is just absolutely incredibly insane. Well, there's just so many.
The implications are.
Yeah, because
the implications are. Let me tell you what the implications are. I need all of you to fact check Uncle Jack. So go buy Andrew Marino's book, Going Somewhere. Read the testimony that Robert Becker and Andrew Marino gave to Congress and realize why it never showed up in the Federal Register. Just so you know, how does something become law when it's in an executive order? Now I'm going to teach you stuff about the government you don't know. Yeah. How does an executive order become the law of the land because of the Chevron defense? Okay? We're talking about even though Chevron's been overturned.
Right.
How did it work in that pre-time? An executive order is written. If it gets published in the Federal Register, it becomes the law of the land. You don't need Congress to pass it.
Right.
That was the method of the madness that who figured out? General Groves. And it was used by all of the guys that were in the
in the office,
Joint Chiefs of Staff during Eisenhower and what do you call it? And Kennedy's regime. And that's what people don't understand. Until you understand how the system is broke, they have been doing everything they possibly can to get rid of the U.S. Constitution, water it down, and replace it with the UN Charter.
Yeah.
If you go back here, not to throw conspiracy in this, but because it's not a conspiracy.
No.
Here's another video for you to pull up. If you go back and listen to what Gaddafi said the only time he ever talked to the UN, there's a video out there. He was only supposed to get 15 minutes. He wound up making him sit for 90 minutes.
Okay.
He pointed out that what's in the preamble of the UN and what the laws and the rules are of the 5 permanent members are completely incongruent with each other. Do you know why they're incongruent? Because of General Groves.
Right.
That's the reason why. General Groves' guys wrote the rules. And when you go see who those guys are, that's George Kennan of the CIA. Those are the Rumsfeld. Those are all the guys, the Dick Cheneys.
Right.
Those are all those guys, their families, the Bush family. All the people that have been involved in this charade for the last 70 years. Those are Nixon's flunkies
Really
that
is.
were partners with corporations.
Bloodline.
Those are Henry Ford's flunkies.
Wow.
Bro, that's the game. And you know, the UN was made for the answer for Germany of the Allied powers. Think about what I said to you in the beginning of this podcast.
Yeah.
I told you the goal was to get back to a one world government. The UN was an idea that Churchill hatched with FDR. It was a bad idea.
Yeah.
And what were they trying to do? They were trying to lure both Stalin and the American government into this thing so that the UN Charter would eventually replace both of their constitutions.
And
That's how the ultimate plan was for the royal family to get back what they lost.
so what was the deal with the first, and I can't believe I'm spacing on this, but the first, the World War II plan for the UN, I forget what it was called, but the
Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan. They had to rebuild. Everything that they lost. I mean, they bombed. Remember, there's consequences of a kinetic war. Those consequences were there.
And then,
and why did they agree to rebuild it? What did FDR learn? FDR learned that rebuilding stuff, doing big projects, like he's the one that did all the national parks, the Hoover Dam, all that jazz. Dude, it's a great way to make sure that you don't have a problem with your economy, which is the main reason why the economy under Eisenhower was the best that we've ever had in the United States history. It was spectacular.
Wow. So what about the?
So you have to realize the Marshall Plan also was Marshall part of the General Groves problem? Not really. He was more of a problem for Eisenhower, and Eisenhower and him were buddies, and they wanted to sidetrack General Groves in this whole story, and they thought they were doing a good thing for the military by getting rid of him. Turns out it was probably the worst decision that Eisenhower ever made. Why? Because Groves became weaponized like Meyer Lansky did. Like this story of Meyer Lansky getting thrown out of Russia because he's a Jew and coming to the United States.
That was a big event.
Lansky and Groves are two of the smartest fucking guys of the 20th century. And they're smart because they decided how to make the plan that the Rothschilds and the royal family do work for them.
Yeah.
And boy, did they. And we, now in 2024, we are getting the tip of the spear from really what that plan looks like. And most of the people who are the executioners of that plan all go back to Trotsky's tribe of communists. Wow. These are the most malignant of the communists. These are the ones that, when I tell you they're left of left, that's true.
As left
like
as it
Stalin
gets.
is considered a moderate
compared to these people.
This
like the Georgia Guidestones type of thing. Have you ever heard of those? They were in the stones written in Georgia. They've since fallen, I suppose. But that whole New World Order stuff. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing Klaus Schwab talks about before he stepped down and all that. Yeah,
Klaus Schwab is just another PR guy for the royal family.
Just a guy that
that's the reason
has a
why
job.
King Charles loves. That's why they're in love with each other. Go look at any video. Every single time they go to Davos, King Charles is always there. He's been there his entire life.
Always.
Even when his mother didn't go, he went.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I'm right in the belly of the beast here, not too far from Buckingham Palace. But
look, this story even encompasses why Princess Di was taken out. Look, it's all tied to the same actors, bro.
And that had to do with the Mossad as well. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Dodi Fayed is not who you want the ex-wife of the king going around.
Right. Because he was a
Muslim.
Muslim. Is that what you're saying?
No, it wasn't that. If he marries the princess,
just okay.
Then the
just if he's
king,
not okay.
Future king is fucking tied to a group of people that they're using as a front. Dude, anything that's going to out their plan.
Right.
You got to realize something. You're playing small ball, and they're playing the longest game ever. Why? Because they've been in power for 1,200 years.
That's how they do it.
You still don't get it. You still don't get it, dude. This is about their legacy, their power. And I would even tell you where most of their power comes from are the Meyer Lansky types. Rothschild doesn't give two fucks about Jews. Anybody who thinks that this is a story about the religion, they are so fucking stupid. This is a story about control and a loyal title.
Yeah.
And when the Bank of England was given access to those families, those families control just about every central bank everywhere in the world. The only central bank they don't control is Satoshi's.
Right.
That's the key.
That's true.
I got news for you. If you own anything in the crypto space that's not Bitcoin, that's also controlled by them, just so you know that. And they're friends in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
All of those guys in Silicon Valley are all Trotskyites.
Right.
Every single one of them.
Yeah, how could that be any different than, we talk about the people from Google and Amazon and all those tech giants.
I'm not even talking about Google. How about Chamath?
I'm talking about
Mark Cuban.
Right, the guys below.
About all the fucking cameras.
The shills.
How about Raoul Pal? I mean, you said you own crypto.
Yeah.
You heard of Raoul Pal?
Yeah.
Where's he from?
Absolutely.
He's from fucking England. He's from England,
so
and he used to work for Goldman Sachs.
Right. So like the like the Charles Hoskinsons, like the big developers, etc. What's his name? Gilbert Verdian. He's a guy from.
How about Vitalik Buterin?
Right, Vitalik Buterin, Ukrainian.
Trotsky.
Yeah.
Trotsky.
Wow.
Okay, not even fucking Bitcoiners get this linkage.
Yeah,
But you need to. It's time to wake up.
Time
people.
to wake up.
We got an election in 31 days from today.
Yeah.
I just hope you, Tyler, you get this out as soon as possible so that people can see it, and make sure you put it on Twitter, because I think Twitter is the one place where this will exist.
It may not be taken
Going
down.
Forward,
yeah,
you got
of
Rumble,
course.
do Rumble. If you don't have a Rumble account, put it on Rumble. But you need to upload it. I mean, people have been asking me when they take Danny's podcast down, is he going to upload it? I'm like, dude, don't ask me. I'm just the guy they interviewed.
Right.
I mean, I don't have the raw data. I don't have any of the recording.
Right.
You got it. It's incumbent upon you guys doing this. The only way you won't do it is if you're a Trotsky guy.
Right.
And I'm worried about you because you told me you're a shitcoiner. So I'm worried about you.
I'm not a shitcoiner. I do have a little bit of Ethereum, but that's because I was into Bitcoin before Ethereum even existed. And, obviously when Ethereum came out, it was very inexpensive. And it was something we all bought a little bit of. But no, I do believe in the principles of Bitcoin.
You own Ethereum, you're supporting federal growth. That's my opinion.
But
my opinion.
Just to clarify, I believe in the ideas behind Bitcoin, and I've said this on many a podcast before that I got involved in it, back in the day, because back then it was not about getting rich. It wasn't about wealth appreciation and getting rich overnight. It was just more about personal sovereignty, freedom, and decentralized finance. That's really all that it was about to us early adopters of Bitcoin. That's where I came into it from. So, as far as the other stuff goes, it's not stuff that, like I say all the time, I would not support anybody. I would not recommend to anybody getting into trading those shitcoins and things like that. But yeah, of course, absolutely. Do I believe in the ideals?
Fiat to Bitcoin. Anybody that listens to this, that's what you need to do. Why? Because that's the real end game here. The game is once they get through all this bullshit, they create the civil war for Trump to deal with. Their goal is still to get the United States and Russia back under their victims. If they have to, run nukes, trust me, they'll run nukes in to get rid of Putin. I swear to God, they're going to do it. That's what the real play is here. They don't care if the radiation comes in because they know the radiation isn't that big a deal. They already know that.
They can get away from it, right?
They know how to get rid of it. Yeah. They know how to get rid of it now. The Trotskyites that are in control have figured this out through a process called CHIRP. Again, I'm not going to get involved, but if you want to learn this science, go look up George Moreau, who's a Jewish guy from France.
Yep.
He won a Nobel Prize for this. They know how to get rid of radiation using light. Dude, they know so much. Don't think anybody who's a Trotsky person is a dumbass, because they're not. They're the smartest people on the planet. The only guy that I think is smarter than them, he's dead. That's Meyer Lansky.
Yeah, I was going to say Lansky. I have a little bit of a fringe question, but so, I mean, in your work, in your line of work, and in your years, rubbing shoulders with people who really, have inside information on a lot of this stuff that connects this bigger story. Do you think that any of this tech, obviously it's been said, and I don't really I don't ride one side of the fence or the other. I just try to hear and collect as much data as possible. Do you think there's any credence to the theories that, some of this tech was actually like reverse engineered ET tech type stuff? I mean, is that
I think it's possible.
But
I think it's possible, but I don't think we're really good at it. The reason why is extraterrestrial tech is never going to run on silicone. Extraterrestrial tech is absolutely going to work on hydrogen.
Right.
The reason why is we are extraterrestrial tech on this planet, and it's going to be based on the lightest atoms on the periodic table.
Makes
not
sense.
Silicon.
Makes sense. So, in your opinion, no, so that doesn't mean that ET tech couldn't exist on this planet. I guess it would just have to,
Well, I think it's probably housed in a warehouse somewhere, close to New Mexico.
Right, somewhere near Roswell.
I think the same people that were involved with the Manhattan Project, are they running the same shit show behind the scenes? Yeah, I absolutely believe that. But you have to realize what I'm telling you. While these people are smart, they're always screwed by their confirmational bias when it comes to money. And you have to realize, most of the people that I told you are bankers and oilmen. This oil story, they're not going to let tech out the box that's going to destroy their markets.
Right.
And you have to realize something. Besides money, what is the single most valuable asset if you're a banker? It's oil. It's energy.
Yeah.
If you don't believe me, that's actually how they're trying to take Putin apart. And they can't. They're finding out it's really difficult to do because what is Putin's ace in the hole? He's got more hydrocarbons than just about anybody on the planet. The problem is he doesn't have the tech.
He's got a lot of land.
Get it out
in
the West. So what is Putin doing? He's playing the long game. Everybody knows he's got nukes. So if the neocons that are running Ukraine for the General Gross crowd get serious and start a nuclear war, and I personally think that the chance of a nuclear war between the election and probably January 20th are not close to zero. I think it's about 20%. Well, I think it's going to be because the neocons realize if they lose, this whole thing that Groves built for the Trotsky folks actually could come to an end. Because, like I said, Trump wants to drain the swamp, but Bobby knows where the drain plug is.
Right.
And remember, they killed his father and his uncle. So knowing what I know, and Nicole used to be married to Sergey. Bro, she knows how pathologic this guy is.
Right.
And they're both on the transition team. Oh, I think the other side knows that Bobby, Nicole, and Trump together are a big problem for Team Trotsky. They're a huge problem.
I would agree.
When you have an existential threat, could you go to the nuclear option? My answer is I could actually see it, but this is when I hope the people in the U.S. military that are not the Joint Chiefs of Staff they begin to put bullets in those people because they're true traitors.
Yeah, and that's when we.
That's what we need. We need the people in the military to actually get off their ass and realize, like, what's going on in North Carolina right now.
Yeah,
This land grab for fucking BlackRock and the lithium mines,
is that
bro. This is like,
with
it's crazy.
with like the Hurricane Helene stuff? With like, I mean, I'm seeing the
Yeah,
citizens.
they're trying to get land that has tons of lithium under because they need that to run their dystopian nightmare of big tech.
It's insane.
That's what this is all about.
That that affected my Tampa area.
We gotta stop it. We gotta stop it. And we have the power to stop. We have 360 million people. When black people realize that it's not the Jews, when the Jews realize it's not the Muslims realize it's not the Jews, and the Christians realize that it's none of them, then everybody can come on the same page together and go, okay, let's get all these fuckers out. Let's join forces. Then we can start our religious fights after the fact. Let's do that. But let's solve this problem first, because it's pretty clear that these guys have been using money in a 1,200-year war against humanity. Yeah. That's what the royal family and the bankers are all about. That story is buried deep in the Federalist Papers. Don't think that Madison and Jefferson didn't know that. But I also want to tell you, I don't think Putin is our enemy. I think Putin understands this. Why? Because what is Putin's line? Putin's line goes back to Stalin, goes through Khrushchev. What do all those guys know? They know what the royal family did. That's why Stalin killed Trotsky.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, that makes sense that he would. Yeah, it makes absolute sense to me that he would know. He'd be at least very hip to what the plan is, what the general long game is, and also not be stupid, and play that long game at least well for his personal interest.
I don't think Putin's a stupid guy.
No,
I don't think Putin's stupid. Putin knows that the political process is his big risk. He needs someone to get in that actually will get rid of the huge problems. Russia's politics are pretty simple to understand, in the 20th century. Why? Because they used Poland as an access point,
right?
To get into Russia twice. And Putin's already said, look, just fucking leave us alone. Don't put NATO in Ukraine, and we're fine. You can do whatever the fuck you want, but the royal family's not getting the Romanov properties back. You lost that. It's over. End your report. You're now a little small country who doesn't control anything except the bankers. You don't control the seas. You don't have enough nuclear weapons. Yeah, you got friends in Israel. You got friends in the United States. But even those countries are not controlled fully yet by the Trotskyites.
Right.
The people still have a say in both those. I think Israel's further gone. Why? Because the Jews have totally bought the whole story of the Mossad and the whole story of their fight. They are tied ideologically to their fight. But let's face it, without the United States, without the Trotskyites, Israel is a very, very vulnerable country. Yeah. And the problem is we need to remove the people who are the Trotskyites in the United States industrial military complex. We do that. We make Bitcoin legal tender or grand reserve asset. What do we do? We return the loyal money back to the people of Russia, Israel, and the United States. We diffuse the Trotskyites. It's very simple.
Yeah.
Bitcoiners got that part right.
We did.
But you guys got to stop abusing the tech. You abuse the tech, you're fucked.
That's a really good point, and that's something that just kind of hit home for me. I mean, because we say that stuff, but then at the same time, it's like we hop on to Solana when we know it's going to pump in price, but all we're doing is feeding that beast. It's the same thing.
It's a dopamine hit. You're going back for your dopamine hit.
Yeah,
just don't forget the story about Mo Dallas when he figured all this out. Yeah. When you understand how you're being played, then it's hard to be played.
Being played, even if you think you're winning, it's bullshit. It's stuff.
Look, I'm gonna have to go.
Yeah, I appreciate you for your time. I know we've had a couple-hour chat here. We chatted a little bit before, so yeah. Jack, appreciate your time. Dr. Jack, I appreciate you, viewers, audience. I appreciate you. I am not going to censor any part of this interview. And if anybody has any questions, you put them in the comments. We will get back to them and make clarifications and any links that.
Well, I can't get back to him if you put it on YouTube.
Well,
You're gonna have to put it on another platform
I'll try to
because I've
clarify
been there
the best we
as
can, and
of this morning.
we'll get it up on Twitter. Hopefully, Mr.
Then
Musk
I can
is
then I
good
can
for us.
comment on it.
Yeah,
Yep. Then I can comment on it.
yeah, yeah. Well, Doctor Decentralized Medicine Speaks. We'll call you. I really appreciate you coming to me from El Salvador. Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate your time.
No problem.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to see what you're doing next and see what you are. There's so many pieces to this story that you've got. So I'm glad I was here to just get a piece of it, and I can't wait to see what the pieces that you put out next are. Absolutely, thank you.
No problem. Take care.
Take care, sir. Thank you very much.
Bye bye.